All right, Chris Peaks back here tonight. Bob Brooks, who is well versed in the Korean War. We hadn't had a talk in a long while. Sorry, we kind of got off course there. Hadn't chatted in a while, but glad to have him back and looking forward to this night. Bob, how are you, man?
Doing well, doing well. Glad to be back.
Yeah, yeah. So, take us into last time it was Task Force 6 we talked about. Was that
Yeah, we got into Task Force Smith, and I
Task
know
Force
that
6?
we were going to talk more about what happened after Task Force Smith, but I wanted to clear up a few things and make sure we got covered before I got too deep into the U.S. involvement there. There's a big gap between June 25th and July 4th and 5th when Americans get involved. I mean,
Mhm.
that's a whole week of battle. And the South Koreans, in general terms, in my opinion, take a hit because, well, they're not looked at in a fair eyesight. They're not looked upon as being highly effective or even effective, right? And I don't think there's much truth to that. There might be a few instances here and there. As a general rule, though, these were fighters. I mean, they got at it. But let's back it up even just a little bit further. Post World War II, 1946, the North Korean peace group, just a collection of police officers and people that were, brought into the military. They all go to Russia and they get their training from Russia.
Right.
Right? They get their uniforms, the whole 9 yards. They're effectively fairly well trained come June 25th, 1950. Right? They've got probably 140 airplanes, not very many attack planes, mostly cargo delivery kind of stuff. And they got about 140 tanks, 150 tanks, somewhere around in there.
Okay.
And the South Koreans had basically, like they say, a constabulary force. Well, on the night of the launch, 4 a.m., June 25th, approximately one-third of the South Korean forces weren't in position. They were on sabbatical for the weekend or on passes. Uh, the main thrust of the North Koreans came down. They're shooting to get to Seoul. What should have been 38,000 South Koreans working the line on that day was roughly about 10,000. And they've got about anywhere from 90 to 120,000 North Koreans coming down after them with tanks. Right.
Wow.
So the South Koreans, they're completely undermanned. They face the 12th and the 13th. The 11th is in reserve, and they're all, like I said, about one-third strength. So you're looking at about 10,000 guys total across the line. That includes the 7th ID and the 6th ID over in the east. And you could say it's a bit of a bloodbath in terms of manpower versus non-manpower, but that's not absolutely true. If you go look at Chuncheon over on the East Coast, I think it's the 6th, maybe it's the 7th uh, ID that takes them on. They're completely undermanned, 2,500 guys or so going against about 10,000, and they repel them, they hold them off. That kind of stuff doesn't get reported. Uh,
How many?
but about 2,400 going against about 10,000. That's a
Wow.
that's a smaller fight on the East Coast side of things. So you have like the 7th, the 6th, and then in the middle towards Seoul, you have the 12th getting hit, followed by the 13th. The 11th is in reserve, and they come up. Um, they're holding defensive positions on the Imjin River around Musan, which is rather south. Um, there's a lot of things that happened and had to happen in order to buy time to get more
Mhm.
men, right? But essentially, like I said, you've got from June 25th to the first week of July, where there are no American forces fighting. They've got KMAC, but on the day it got hit by June 26th, they were all called back away from their South Korean counterparts. And then they were put back in a couple days later, but they were recalled. So it was basically a civil war, South Korea versus North Korea.
So let me ask you this: how intense is this fighting? Are this constant engagement, or is it sporadic battles, or what's it looking like?
It's pretty constant. I mean, like I said, you look at the battlefield. You got 10,000 guys spread over the entire width of the country, and
Okay,
you got
just
98,000 coming at them. You know, with two tank divisions, 40 tanks on one in one division coming at you, 40 tanks in another. And these South Koreans had never seen a tank. And their 57 millimeter anti-tank guns, they didn't have armor piercing. So they couldn't take out the tanks. Everything was bouncing off. Mortar shells, uh, their anti-tank guns were bouncing off of them because they couldn't penetrate. Kim Pak-soon, I think that's his name, the general in charge. Fake had noticed during the fighting that he saw some of his men strapping dynamite to their chest, and they would climb on these tanks and then ignite it once they got on top of the tanks. And they managed to stop some tanks that way. I mean, if that
wow.
ain't heroism 101, I don't know what is.
Mm.
That doesn't strike me as a weak force, in other words. You know, can you imagine anybody in the US making that move? I mean, that's kind of that's
God.
that's a far field to catch.
So, and this may be a tough question to ask. How about 10,000 versus 2,400? Are these like individual battles or pitched battles?
Uh, when you're fighting major waves, and the
Okay,
tanks.
okay,
Anytime the defense was set up, the line was almost immediately broken with tank and infantry. I mean, they were just outgunned, literally outgunned. And like I said, South Koreans had never had to deal with a tank before. The general actually had mentioned in his memoirs, he goes, my guys had tank fear. They just heard the word tank and they started kind of freaking out about it because they didn't know what to do with them, how to manage them, how to take them out.
yeah,
But I just wanted to be clear on that, there is a big gap in there.
yeah. This is all new to me.
Their ports all the way back to the Imjin River and beyond. And Quezon was part of it. Seoul, gets flipped. Chuchon area kind of held on the east side. But the drive is to put everybody down towards the Pusan perimeter. That comes July 2nd. Americans start landing July 4th. Task Force Smith is up on the line. So you got the 21st Infantry, the 19th, the 5th Cavalry's coming in. All those guys that were on leave when all this hit, all those guys are emergency recall, needless to say. So the South Koreans bolstered their lines as quickly as they could. So to me, buying that 8-9 days worth of fighting says a lot about their abilities, at least in terms of overall heroism. So I think that should be noted. It shouldn't be overlooked. There's not much spoken about that.
Okay. I mean, yeah, this is all new to me, man. Because we never get taught this. This war never taught. Always ignored.
Well, if you look at today's military, right, well, and we'll take the U.S. And we'll break them down over time. There could be 100 men to a company back in World War II, and that gets dwindled down to Korea to about 55 plus officers, or 50 plus officers per company, and 3 or 4 companies per unit. Well, for yourself, when you were in Afghanistan, right, and you go hit your barracks, how many of the men are wearing your badge, wearing your patch? 20, 10, 30?
Maybe around. I want to say about around 30.
So you see that company size dwindle time over time.
Mm-hmm.
But in Americans' defense, we make up for it in technology, and training, and expertise. that doesn't compare to the training and expertise that you saw in any military really for 1950, and maybe even more so in South Korea at the time.
Right. Yeah. Because yeah, that makes sense. Because we get more advanced, the military is just going to naturally shrink. I mean, you don't need as many men to perform that job.
Right. You get a lot more with a lot less. So when you think about like even a Navy SEAL team going into somebody's perimeter just to kidnap a guy, I mean that's a set of balls. You know, you might be working around 200 or 300 enemy combatants.
Oh yeah, I mean that. You know, whatever people want to think. You know, but when they Obama called that in 2012, man, that was a one Carter tried to pull it off too. That was a ballsy move, man. Because if that goes wrong, all America's going to turn against you.
Oh yeah, yeah. The court of public opinion is really going to light you up.
I mean, because if not to get off target, but had Carter pulled that off in 1980, he gets reelected. If that
Yeah,
fails under Obama, he doesn't get reelected. I mean,
right.
but yeah, that's yeah, you're right. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take you off. Well,
No, no, you're fine. I actually thought to myself today, I'm not as prepared as I wanted to be going into discussing the Pusan perimeter and the successes of Task Force Smith and all as all that stuff is pushed back. So I'm just going to bring up a few names.
okay.
The Marines are brought in. The 5th RCT is brought in. Walker's 8th Army is getting bolstered up. You have shipload after shipload coming into the Pusan ports. They're unloading tank battalions left and right. In the meantime, you had North Koreans using sampans to bring in infantry, right?
Mhm.
And as a matter of fact, one group of them, I think it was at Incheon, that the South Koreans managed to get mortar shells on the sampans that were bringing in troops and sinking them before they ever got to shore, which I thought was a pretty good move on their part, needless to say. But you're trying to buy time, and you're trying to build a perimeter, and you're trying to use Mother Nature as much as possible. So you have the Nakton River. They used the Han River shortly. The South Koreans used the Han River and the Han River Bridge. Incidentally, on that event, so you had the 12th Division above the bridge of Han, or the Han River Bridge, and at 2:30 they blow the bridge. This is on the 27th, I think it is, 2 days later. We
Mhm.
still had men and people trying to migrate south. They're on the other side and they can't get loose. They can't get across that bridge because they blow the bridge with people on it and kill anywhere between 500 and 800 people, not including injuries, just to prevent the North Koreans from coming across. I mean, that's a brutal call. That's just a
That is
brutal call. But
that.
between 46 and 49, there was a lot of guerrilla activity in the South. And I think that helped convince Kim that, hey, if we go, right, we're going to have a lot of support once we get there anyway, because he thought that the guerrilla factions in the South uh, also employed their mindsets over the citizenry of the time and figured the citizens would be on board with unification from the North and not the South.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Now Sigmund Rhee, the leader of the South Koreans, he was pretty harsh. If you thought that you were, anti-South Korean, then it was nothing for him to line you up and shoot you. But the North Koreans were doing the same thing, and they were doing it with POWs. I mean,
Wow.
that's how brutal it was. And when the North Koreans did it, they usually tied your wrist behind your back and shot you in the back of the head.
Mm.
Now,
God,
two of those guys survived one of those killings. The grandson or the son of one guy named Rudd, Rudd. He's on my Facebook page. His father was one of those survivors.
wow, for real?
Yeah, there's an iconic picture of those two being questioned after the attack, and they're pointing out three of the
Mm.
guys that were involved in the shootings.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean we're talking brutal. I'm not saying that didn't happen in Afghanistan and Iraq. I think that's just the nature of humanity under war conditions. And I'm trying to choose my words wisely here. As bad as that is, I don't think it's all that uncommon.
Uh, I mean, probably not with like the western side now. You know,
Oh yeah, on
America.
the Western side now, I agree with you. I don't think it's like
Yeah,
right,
that's not gonna happen. But yeah, I mean, I would say you're probably right on that. Probably a lot worse is done.
right. And I don't put Sigmund Rhee into Western mindset like we're discussing in Iraq, Afghanistan, and I don't put Sigmund Rhee in that scenario. Uh,
Right.
he is fully Korean and fully part of Korean culture at that time. So uh, he to me, you can't lump him in. If you're out there killing citizens on your own because you're afraid of an uprising later on, I mean that's just pure tyranny, really. But
Right.
in South Korea, he's well honored for keeping the country together. So again, I don't know how to look at it. It's a tough call either way you go.
Well, I mean, we're just raised in such a different time now that more values put on life than what they are. I mean,
Yeah, there's some highly cultural differences.
right. I mean, it's not, yeah, it's, I get it. It's stuff that, to come to terms with. I mean,
So when you get into, and we'll get into more specifics about the Pusan perimeter, but if you go and you look at the Pusan perimeter map, uh, you'll see maybe less than a tenth of the country is cordoned off with a perimeter that
yeah,
prevents what's left of the South Koreans as a whole, those that weren't killed, captured, or floundering around, or even supporting the North Korean invasion outside of that perimeter. Inside the perimeter, Walker is moving all of these units around in order to protect that perimeter. He doesn't have enough men to cover the miles that have to be covered to prevent a North Korean passage, right? And to me, that's the Medal of Honor effort from a general. I don't think you've ever seen anything like it. I don't think you'll ever see anything like it again. It would be highly unlikely, but it definitely should go in the history books as being such a unique effort and a just a phenomenal response to the situation. I almost imagine for myself if Walker was in charge of where MacArthur was in World War II, if that was General Walker, I wonder what the outcome would have been. Or if Walker was in charge of General Clark at Monte Cassino or even North Africa, I wonder how that would have played out if Walker was the 2 or 3 star general in that equation, or
um,
or even replacing Friedendahl in North Africa.
yeah, see, I mean, to be honest with you, I've never, not, don't even know anything about the guy. You brought him up. I have to look him up and read on this guy.
Yeah, I mean he's just a phenomenal guy. Unfortunately, uh, he's killed later in the war from
Really?
car crash, and he gets killed in a car crash, and that's when Ridgway comes in and takes over his position. And you'll note later in the war when MacArthur's replaced, Ridgway takes MacArthur's place, right?
Okay.
So that's the evolution of that. And this is all 1951 action. Uh, Truman gets a little upset with MacArthur, and probably rightly so. Um, Mixed opinions you'll find on MacArthur. Was he, the best general, or was he good during the war? Yada yada yada. My take on it is, you go to war with the army that you have, not the army you wish you had, right? And at the
Right.
time, MacArthur, without a doubt, was probably the best man for the job.
Hmm.
But if I was to replace him, if we're going to play the ifs and fifths of it, I would definitely look at General Walker, Bulldog Walker. Yeah, he's well worth checking out.
Bulldog Walker. Okay.
Say again?
I said Bulldog Walker. Okay.
Yeah. We talked about a couple other things that were gap data points between World War II and Korea, specifically the Russians. Stalin really didn't care one way or other, I think at the time, but he certainly didn't have a problem with the communist expansion in North Korea under Kim. So that explains the T-38s and the Air Force support. You know, he's flying Russian pilots in North Korean airplanes that were Russian made just to get those guys blooded
Yeah.
experience in the field, if you will. Uh, Mao, on the other hand, he's a he's a different animal altogether, and I think we discussed that on the previous post that he needed a buffer zone between China and the West, and North Korea fulfilled that really well. Another point about Russia. Russia has always been seeking a warm water port, and they're still having a hard time finding one. Uh,
Right.
you'll note Ukraine as an example. Vladivostok, I think, is probably as warm as it'll ever get for their submarine bases or their navy bases, and they're just geographically locked in for what it's
Right.
worth. And I don't think there's any good way out of it, short of a good, strong land acquisition. But even if they took Ukraine, they still have to find their way out of the Black Sea, and that
Hmm.
is a small funnel to go through.
True.
So
And
anyway,
they're locked in. I mean, they are. They're locked in.
that's that's just some side points. You know, they trained the North Koreans, the Chinese was willing to offer support, but Mao drew the line. He said, you all come across the 38th, and we're going to get involved. And of course, Sigmund Reed forces them to go across in 51. And about 2 weeks later, the UN Security Council gives the okay to Macarthur to follow them in, and they do. And all hell breaks loose from there. Most of the vets I talked to suggest that we never should have crossed the 38th and we never needed to cross the 38th. All we had to do was hold it. So the expansion of that particular conflict could have been prevented had they not crossed. But then you go back to MacArthur. Well, he's ordered to cross. I know he wants to go, but he has to get approval to go, and that he gets from the UN.
Hmm.
So it's a global decision. It's not just his. So how much do you blame MacArthur for the expansion of the war if he's not the one making the call? I mean, I just think that's a fair question to ask.
I mean, yeah. I mean, he's just a soldier following orders.
Well, essentially, even though he's the one promoting the order, right? But he also wanted to promote small nuclear strikes along the Yalu River. And Truman wasn't going to have that. You're not bringing more nukes in it. There's a memo, or I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Truman's daughter took some notes in her diary about her father's opinion about the Korean War.
Yeah.
And right out of starting gate on like June 26, 27, she makes a note or talks about that particular date, saying that her father was really concerned about firing off World War III. And I think I mentioned that to you before. You want to be the guy that ended World War II. You don't want to be the guy that ended World War II and started World War III. So
Wow.
now I really don't have a whole lot tonight to go
Well,
into
that's fine.
deep.
Mhm. I mean, that's plenty for to lead us into the next one. Everything you want to add to it?
Well, I mean, if you want to talk about World War II like we did the other night, I think that's a fun conversation. You know, what
We
the
can talk off
what the,
camera on that.
say again?
We can talk recording, talk that off camera.
Okay.
I mean, if you want to do some World War II stuff one night, we can do that.
Yeah, I'd like to. I think that'd be a fun conversation.
Why don't you stop
Uh,
this a minute?
yeah, last night we got at it. I think we went for about 2 hours, didn't we?